Just a little bit of something sticking in.
Bienvenue. Welcome to the fourth podcast about property this week. This one is Property Quorum, a bun fight where we talk about a topic that's happening right now, affecting usually landlords, homeowners, and everything in between. Today's topic is no different. But before we get into that, let me introduce you to our excitants, combatants, or whatever you like to refer to them as. Hamish McClay of Search Convey, as ever. Silas J. Lees of Wigwam, of course, our tame legal eagle, Zara Olivokas of Nexa Law. And this is something that actually I think probably fits into Silas's wheelhouse quite squarely, but we'll get there. It's called the two-speed housing market. Hamish, would you start us off, please?
Well, it's strange. It's a bit like the weather, actually, the housing market. Very rarely do you get exactly the same conditions throughout the sort of UK. At the moment, the late rain is streaming down here in Oxfordshire. I'm sure it isn't. But welcome and good morning to you all. The interesting thing is when you actually get involved, and it's quite fortunate because with the type of work which we actually do, we have different work to do with different councils throughout England and Wales. Fortunately, we don't tread into Scotland and Ireland at the moment because they differ slightly. However, but it varies so much as to the progress that we can actually make with local authority searches. And sometimes it's down to the fact that the council could be inundated. But however, it's not just that. It's the availability of housing. Now, one of the great sort of speakers on this particular sort of subject, because she carries out a great deal of research, Kate Faulkner, she looks at statistics and she could actually sort of tell you, and she's a fascinating speaker actually, because she does explain how different areas of the country are actually sort of operating within, if you like, sort of time frames, house sales, demand, and all the rest of it. And I know for a fact there's a massive demand in Bristol and masses of sort of people struggling to try and get properties, whether they be buying properties or whether they be renting properties. Bristol is a big struggle. London isn't quite such a big struggle, but the problem with London, of course, the prices are really sort of over the top. Yet when you actually start moving further north, where prices are reduced, there can be struggles in different pockets. So it's not really even a two-tier system. It's more than a two-tier system.
Wow. All right, well, it's a good starting point. I'm going to jump straight. Silas, what's going on?
Well, good morning, Gareth, and morning, everybody else. There is an interesting scenario unfolding from my point of view within the housing market right now. And as Hamish alluded to, different pockets of the country are moving at different speeds in terms of transaction volume. But I think one of the underlying factors is in relation to affordability. And there does seem to be a lot of sort of creaking at the seams in terms of how affordable properties actually are for local residents. Or for people moving into the area. And as a consequence, that will always put a slowing mechanism or a braking mechanism, if you like, on the speed at which properties are transacted or the speed at which a property actually achieves a buyer. And we saw this very much in every sort of recession that unfolds is that you tend to see this peak in London in terms of property prices. London peaks and then sort of slows down very, very significantly in terms of property selling. And then the rest of the country follows suit sort of 6, 12, 18 months later on. So I think we're in that point at the moment where London is slowing. Other pockets may still be going on really well. But is there an affordability crisis on the horizon that is going to slow the market overall across the country? I do believe that's here. And that's based on confidence, that's based on job security, that's based on the economic prospects of the country. which some people will agree aren't looking too good at the moment. But that's just my pessimistic opinion, Gareth.
So are buyers being more cautious, or are they simply being more realistic?
I think that there's an element of caution, undoubtedly. The market has switched very much so from 2021, when everything was coming on the market would just sell and sell for more than the asking price. And now we have a situation where it's more a buyer's market, a lot more of a buyer's market. I regularly read in the forums, the social media groups, etc., where people have had a house on the market for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks or longer, and not a single viewing. And the knee-jerk reaction, of course, is, oh, it's overpriced, which is true with a certain extent, but also it's not factoring into the wider economic impact, which is there's a lack of confidence in the country. There's a lack of people feeling good. There's a lack of willingness to tie yourself up to a 25-year mortgage if you feel that your job may be in jeopardy. And I think that's really where we're at. We've got a big melting pot of increased burden on companies to employ people. We've got AI on the horizon. There does seem to be a lot more caution than there was, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Before I pass over to Zara, are lenders helping? Are they holding the market back?
That is an excellent question. So I think both, if I'm frank. So we see a lot of this innovation, and this is the thing that we don't seem to be able to learn from history. If you look at what happened in 2007 and 2006, there was this push by lenders to increase the amount of money that they would lend against property. So I had a friend who managed to get 125% mortgage on a property.
Ooh.
Right. So instantly from day one, you're in negative equity. This is an absolute fact. 125% mortgage on a property. And there was a time when lenders, and you'll remember Northern Rock, for example, lenders were pushing money out the door into the market, heaped onto, quite frankly, naive buyers who didn't understand the mechanics. They were just like, well, they're going to give me all this money. I don't need a deposit, or I only need 5%. And that's, of course, caused this boom in house prices. And so now we're in a position where lenders, for example, like Santander, are stepping forward. They're saying that you can get on the housing market for, just 5% deposit, which sounds really good. The problem is the majority of first-time buyers don't know that that's a possibility first and foremost. Secondly, it pushes prices up because there's more availability of borrowing. So I always use the question, how much would a house truly be worth if you couldn't borrow money to buy it? Or if bank lending mortgages went away, what would a property really be worth? Would they really be worth, an average price of 285,000 or whatever it is right now? I think those are important points.
So do you consider this to be part of a correction, a pause, or maybe the start of a longer reset?
I think it's the warning signs have been flashing for a long time, and the problem is now with the interconnectivity of the world, it is not just confined to the UK. We have global influences. People will blame the war in Iran for the fact that the confidence is evaporating from the market without looking at our leadership in Whitehall. That's one thing that we need to be looking at. The other thing where I think lenders could help the market significantly is that they could step in and help address the fall through rate. Interestingly, I was speaking to somebody yesterday. They shall remain nameless, but they were working with the largest lender in the UK. And get these for facts, guys. The largest lender in the UK spent £250 million to try and speed up the housing market process and all these different initiatives. And they achieved a reduction of 4 days in the process. Okay, so a reduction in timeline by 4 days, and they spent 250 million quid to try and achieve that. Now, if they'd have come and talked to somebody like myself, I don't want to put myself on a pedestal here, but that money could have been spent in a lot better fashion and drastically reduced the fall-through rates, drastically reduced transaction times. But unfortunately, they're addressing the wrong areas because the people advising them don't really know all of the bottlenecks that they need to sort of tackle. So I think lenders aren't helping in the way that they could do, and it's to their detriment because we've identified somewhere between 50 and 100 billion a year opportunity that lenders are overlooking because of the damage that's being done in the housing market at the moment.
Zara, welcome to the show. Let me start with an overall one. Is the idea of getting on the ladder outdated for many younger people now?
Well, funny, I was just talking to another parent who's gifting a rather large sum of money to their children.
Good Lord.
And she was saying that, she feels for the younger generations because obviously house prices have been pushed so high that it's out of reach for many. And I was just saying potentially my kids might be living with me, well after they've returned from university.
Hamish and I were only discussing the other day about multi-generational living, and it which is quite common across the continent, but over here has not really been a thing for quite a long time.
No, and as Silas was saying, we need to learn from history, but it does go in cycles. Silas mentioned the 2007-2008 crash, but before that were before I remember, but the 1980s, there was also a crash then. But what we've got now is something not completely different, but you're looking at people trying to make more money out of the system. So it's not about doing the right thing and building decent housing. It's about how much profit can we make from putting together a box and making someone live in it. So, Hamish mentioned Bristol, which is where I live. They're building a massive new site just across the road from where I live. It's going to have the Bristol Arena. But if you go across and look what they've already built, it literally is boxes with satellite dishes on them. And I've got, I went along to one of my MP surgeries. A gentleman came along and said to me, I've still got a Dublin ground rent on my flat lease. So, these things aren't going away. And it's the complex legal structures that none of the MPs, none of the lenders really want to sit down and understand. Some of the lenders are cottoning on to the fact that, there are complex legal structures being set up, but, these sites are being set up and a lot of the responsibilities being pushed back onto homeowners. So we've got people paying council tax, and on the top of that, you're still having to pay for roads and sewers, but we don't know how much that's going to cost in the future because obviously we don't know what quality the developers put in, and if it's anything to go by from my house, as I was just saying to my husband last night, we're going to have to demolish it and rebuild the whole thing, and the property's just about 15 years old, because everything just needs replacing. It's literally everything is plasterboard.
Parthenon, 3,000 years. Modern new builds, 15 years. Just worrying. All right. A couple of legal questions for you.
Yeah.
Are the legal risks different for buyers in a slow market compared to a fast-moving one?
They're the same. But the thing is, they're just trying to push it through quicker. And there's this push for an Amazonization of buying a property. But,
right.
Amazon's great. You can message them and say you want a refund, but you can't reverse a property transaction unless you've got loads of money to take your seller to court. And then what happens if there's a chain? And that's where everything interlinks here. There's, you've got 3-4 people all wanting to move house on the same day. Monies get passed up the chain. Yes, that bit is being looked at to make it quicker. Yeah, fine, fair enough. If that works, it works. What we've got though is the lack of organisation from I frequently hear complaints from factory outfits that haven't ordered their monies in on time. So we're sitting there still waiting for the monies to arrive on the day of completion when we've got people in vans, sitting and waiting for their keys.
Right.
So it's this sort of thing, where things, if you prepare for the worst, it can all be done, beforehand, so everything goes smoothly on the day.
Well, I got a subsequent question to that. Are people making legal mistakes because they're behaving as if the market is still booming?
Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of it's not so much legal mistakes, it's the pressure that's being put on by various parties.
Right.
We've got sellers throwing their toys out the pram, basically saying, if you don't exchange or give me a completion date by such and such date, I'm pulling out. You've got the developers who are still naively trying to force commercial terms onto residential properties where they want this 28-day exchange, even though the property's not built, they haven't got half the paperwork. They're basically saying to conveyancers who are diligent and look through the paperwork cautiously, oh, nobody else has raised that, we're not going to change anything, tough luck, either take it or leave it. And people just feel so desperate for a roof over their heads, they will just say, yeah, okay, we'll pay. Same with shared ownership. We're just going to stick that in there because it's taken me so long to realise, the terms of the shared ownership lease are actually very unfair to someone who's looking for something affordable. They look at the financial figures, but it's only forecast or budgeted for the first couple of years. And then what you've got is, I actually picked something up the other day where they forecast, the rent increases, and the rent increases are not, fixed. They're done in accordance with a formula, but it's compounding. So it's added on top of the previous rent. So which means that your rent will ever only go up. So if you're looking at the original lease from 25 years ago or something like that, the original rent the person was being charged is very, very low. And what they're paying now is significantly, could be, £400, £500 more than the original lease. But this is what they're trying to work at, is projecting more figures into the future to try and look at affordability. But what they're not factoring in are the uncapped nature of service charges, and you will get that on every single site now built within the last 25 years. There's always an estate management company, freehold or leasehold, or sometimes there's two of them, and it increases costs for both buyers and sellers.
I've got a contentious question. Could more upfront legal packs speed up the market, or could they just add another cost?
Depends what you're looking at, because you can put all this information together in a pretty little package. And I know they use it in other countries. But if you're looking at it from Joe Blogg's perspective off the street, there's a huge lack of knowledge as to what they're looking at. And they think, yeah, okay. And it just washes over their heads. And they just think, oh, yes, give me the keys. But until they put it in front of a lawyer who looks at it and says, well, these are the holes, this is what's not been provided, it's not going to speed anything up when you've got people still arguing over electrical certificates, electrical reports, gas boiler service things, which sellers aren't obliged to provide. It is up to the buyer to go and get those investigated. I mean, would you still trust a seller to get that done if their mate Dave down the pub was an electrician and just sort of said, yeah, okay, whatever, and gave them a certificate? So it's always best to get it checked out yourself. And, even if I've been doing this for over 20 years, I've never ever seen a contract pack that's perfect where I didn't have to raise questions. And there will always be the part where you have to raise questions. You've got all these providers out there purporting to put together sellers packs. Great. But what they just give you are the bare bones, and it's not any legal explanation. And to give you an example, I was acting on a shared ownership lease. I picked up that it was a complex legal structure, and I looked at the structure carefully because it's a head lease to the registered provider, and a shared ownership under lease, and the parent company is a private investment firm. And so when you look at the leases, you think, oh yeah, great, it's fine, you can acquire 100%. But if you're buying a house, you want to acquire the freehold on 100% ownership. But this particular lease didn't have the right to acquire the freehold. So I'm saying to the client, you can have the staircasing, but if you want to end up buying that freehold, you have to pay twice. Once to the housing association, and then again to the private parent company, the investment company. And basically the seller refused to pay to rectify the legal defect. Lender said, we're not prepared to lend unless that's rectified. And I was being gaslighted by all corners. Landlord solicitors basically saying, oh yes, no problem, we'll let you have the freehold. And I'm just like, that's not what the legal documents say. Saying in 5-10 years time when she wants to go and do this, if I'm not around, I need to give my client some paperwork to say she doesn't have to pay twice. And she can't rely on some email from the landlord solicitor saying, yeah, okay, it's not a problem, because they can change their mind. It's not a legally binding agreement.
What a tangled web we weave. Hamish McClay, would you care to take us home?
Well, there's not a lot of untangling I can do. It was rather interesting because we're speaking about upfront information. There was a client of mine I've done some work for in the past got in touch yesterday and said, oh, Hamish, can you get hold of somebody who can conduct a survey with asbestos in it? Because this property has been identified as potentially having asbestos. And I did say, well, how did that come about? And they said, well, we got the property 6 months ago. We've done the property up. It's going to be a house for multiple occupation. Basically, we're actually going out to the sort of lender now to get sort of additional sort of funding, all the various rest of it. And the lender has come back and said, on this particular sort of form, which is upfront information, one of the questions was relative to asbestos. Did the property contain asbestos? I don't know exactly what the question was. And the owner had very wisely put down, I don't know.
Of course.
Now, initially, that was not picked up on. That was not picked up on until 6 months later. And I mean, as it sort of happened, we can get somebody in there sort of very, very quickly locally. Again, local works best. There are companies throughout England and Wales who do actually carry out sort of surveys. And it's not, I mean, I can actually recollect 4 or 5 times when asbestos has actually crept in. I mean, 50% of those were actually commercial properties. The other 50% are actually sort of residential. So it does vary. But it depends what is done with the information. And as Zara sort of said, there can be questions and you really don't know. The advantage is, I would guess, if that information does say, well, don't know about Japanese knotweed, for example, if it's acted upon early days, it gives a potential to run through, get it out of the way at the start of the whole transaction, rather than waiting to, like as sort of Zara sort of said, these people waiting, when are we going to get the keys? When are we get, hang on a bit, we've got to get this investigation carried out. So it does actually sort of vary from whatever part of the country you're in. I don't think we fully answered that, but I think we demonstrated that it does vary so much within different parts of the country as to what speed things can be handled at. And each property, again, is an individual property, like the individual that's buying it. We need to remember that individual aspect about it.
Individually, absolutely. We've got actually a couple of questions that I'm going to throw at Zara from Christine. Christine says, should the Law Society be doing more to educate the seller with completing the forms?
Christine, there are explanatory notes that should go out to the client on both. We've been told to send them out on both sales and purchases. But what I'm finding is that people don't read anything they're given, and it's a lot of, what should I say, legal jargon for them to get their heads through. Classic question is, Hamish mentioned asbestos. I'm talking about Japanese knotweed. There's still people out there that will, just read the form and think it's a yes/no answer, not realizing that yes or no means that they've actually had a look at whether or not there's Japanese knotweed, when they should be ticking don't know, to avoid exposing themselves to liability. And some conveyancers will just, put it, not check them before it goes out initially. And I still put in a separate explanation notes to my clients, and I'm still finding they're not reading it, because I've put big warning in red saying, please look at this question carefully. It could, leave yourself open to liability if you answer yes or no. So just make sure you've checked it. As Silas is looking at on social media, a lady who had ticked no to the question, she was like huffing and puffing on the Nextdoor app about why her solicitor was asking her for an investigation report into Japanese knotweed, and I sort of explained to her that means you've investigated it, so best to tell your solicitor to change the answer.
Quite right. Better to be definitive with proof rather than definitive without. Otherwise, you're laying yourself open. Thank you so much, one and all. What a great and spirited discussion today, if not very happy. Thank you, Silas J. Lees of Wiggywan. Thank you, Zara Olibukas of Nexa Law. And, of course, our excellent search specialist, Hamish McClay of Search Convey. And to all of you watching, because I know there's been quite a few, there still are, remember, surround yourself with people with local knowledge who are really specialists in their game. Please try and avoid people who say maybe, and try and rather find people who say maybe, but I will research it. That's the way you really need to go. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and in these troubled times, particularly troubled times, look after that mental health. Until tomorrow. Bye-bye.